What's up, everybody? Welcome to another Beyond Terrain mini lecture. Today we're going to be talking about food poisoning. Super confusing topic when you start to think about the terrain paradigm. Something that confused me for a long time, so we're going to try to, explain it out in this video today. There's two big fundamental components, internal and external environments, that we'll kind of break this down into. We got a cold morning today. It's nice and icy. This trail is just brutal right now. So if I'm looking down, please excuse me. We are going to be starting a Beyond Terrain private community. If you're interested, there's going to be a link down below to join a wait list. We are going to be giving out a huge discount to the founding members. I really want to build a good, positive community, all centered around terrain. There we're really going to be going deeper, more specifics. I know these videos can be kind of general. We're kind of working on more fundamental axioms of health, biology, science in general. So if you are interested, there's going to be a whole lot going on there. So make sure you go check that link out to learn a little bit more and join the wait list. All right, let's talk about food poisoning. So this plagued me for a long time. How do you explain food poisoning? Certainly seems to be that the microbes being present in the food are the cause of disease. So this obviously isn't the case. When we're talking about food poisoning, we can think about it as unnatural internal environments and unnatural external environments. I think this is a good way to kind of break this down. When we're thinking about disease in general, it's good to kind of conceptualize it in this manner as well. There's lots to consider, obviously, but I think we can categorize it within these two sections. All right, let's think about the symptoms of food poisoning. Obviously, primarily we have gastro symptoms. In the acute, less severe stages, you have, diarrhea and you have vomiting. Those are kind of the big ones. Now, you can sometimes see more flu-like symptoms. Sometimes you can see fevers associated with this. So, that's not an uncommon thing to observe. Now, that will get in, to a bigger discussion here, but what comes to mind when we think of these symptoms is detox, right? So food poisoning is not necessarily the worst way to conceptualize it. It might not be the right way to describe it, but what we're dealing with as symptoms, as the healing process, is detox, right? You're trying to get that food out for various reasons. Now, let us begin our discussion on internal versus external environments and the factors that come to mind when we're discussing these. So if you have an unnatural internal environment, what I mean by this is that you don't have an internal environment that is adapted to the natural way of living. So it might have been due to a lifetime of eating processed foods, living in sterile environments, not being exposed to microbes, not having a proper microbiome. Your body is not adapted. It's intolerant to, natural foods, natural raw foods especially. So that's why people might get gastro symptoms when they consume raw milk. That's why you might get gastro symptoms if you consume raw meat for the first time after consuming nothing but a modern processed diet. So it's really important here to understand this, that, it's not the food again, right? It's the unnatural internal environment that is allowing these symptoms to manifest. The body cannot tolerate these foods, and there's a lot to be said about the detox mechanism of consuming raw food. So if you consume raw milk and it creates these gastro symptoms, often it's not absolutely instant. So the body does have time to be able to relinquish some of its toxicity as well. There's a lot to be said about that. Raw milk and raw foods and raw fats being able to absorb toxins, even cleaning out the gut, right? So it's almost like a trigger for detox when you consume these raw foods. You're able to actually get these foods out. And that's what we discuss in the terrain model, when we're talking about supporting systems or supporting habits that allow our body to detox and replenish properly, right? So if you are consuming these raw foods, you're obviously going to be, I would say, getting the nutrients from them, even if you do have a really poor internal environment that's not adapted to these natural foods and the microbes they're in. And at the same time, you're going to be relinquishing these toxicities. So I think it's kind of like a twofold benefit there to consuming raw foods, even if you are on a heavy processed diet. Now, this is exactly why the Agenus Vonderplanitz folks talk about slowly introducing raw foods. You don't want to jump into just eating higher liver, rotten liver or rotten meats. Although these can be extremely effective for detox, it's going to create severe detox symptoms. So the Agenus Vonderplanitz primal diet is actually centered around trying to minimize the symptoms of detox while maximizing detox. So that's where I think Agenus works truly shines. Again, is his diet completely natural? There's an argument against that. Green juices don't seem to be the most natural thing to consume. I don't think the natives were out there with their juicers making green juice, right? So I think that's something important to consider. But if we were born and raised and generationally we're eating natural diets, we probably wouldn't need these green juices or anything like that. So if you grew up in a sterile environment and you were fed formula and you ate processed foods your entire life, and you switched to starting to drink raw milk and eat raw meat and eat all these raw animal foods, what's going to happen? Likely you're going to have gastro symptoms. Now, it's going to be food poisoning. Definitely not. It's definitely not going to be food poisoning. I think it's more easily explained as detox, unless you were consuming the latter class of foods that do cause food poisoning, but not because of microbes. We'll get to that, external environments, in a moment. I do think that there's only two ways to really explain this out, and it's either one, that the raw milk is triggering the detox, or two, that there are microbes in the milk that your body's not used to, and so due to it not being exposed to these microbes, your body can't handle these microbes, and so you need to excrete that food. I do tend towards the former. I do think that makes a lot more sense within our framework. So to be clear, I think that the idea that raw foods are detoxing fits into the terrain model better than the idea that our body's not necessarily adapted to these microbes. I think the reality of the situation, and the huge confounding variable here, is that if you're not adapted to these microbes, you are consuming a standard American diet, which is full of toxicity, right? So we have this underlying toxicity that's a huge confounding variable that cannot be overlooked, right? So is it an adaptability? Is it detox? I would say it's always going to be detox if you're consuming raw foods, because no one can consume the standard American diet and not be burdened with toxicity. Unnatural external environments. This is where I think the term food poisoning makes a lot more sense. What it constitutes an unnatural external environment. What we're talking about here is unnatural foods. So, take farmed raised salmon versus, wild caught salmon. And even wild caught salmon is growing up in streams that are absolutely full of toxicity. So the fish, especially in rivers and fresh waters, are dealing with an extreme amount of toxicity. And the ocean's not, an exception to that. And even farm animals aren't an exception to that either. Wild animals aren't an exception. There are microplastics at the top of, Mount Everest and at the bottom of the Marianas Trench, right? So every inch of this world is polluted due to humans, so that's a big confounding variable here. But what I'm saying when I say unnatural external environments, I'm talking about foods that are unnatural. People get food poisoning from lettuce, pesticide lettuce. They get food poisoning from oat milk. These are some of the biggest listeria outbreaks in the recent years. These hyper-processed foods, are causing food poisoning. And that's because when the microbe is able to break it down, that microbe is such an unnatural microbe that, the body, it's foreign, right? So our microbes do adapt to toxic environments and they help clean it up, but if there's an unnatural external environment that's never been seen before, that microbe that needs to clean that environment up has never been seen before, right? The microbe has to almost be de novo in a way, right? It needs to create, if you want to think of it biochemically, it needs to create new biochemical pathways to be able to synthesize, bioremediate, and, help clean up this toxin, right? So a foreign toxin that we've synthesized in a lab is going to create a foreign biochemical pathway in a microbe and thus create, you know, a foreign microbe. So I think that's an important point to make. If you consume any sort of rotten processed food or rotten unnatural food, like even a fruit that's been doused in pesticides, grown in unnatural monoculture environments, this can cause disease, right? And this is food poisoning. But again, it's not the microbe that's causing this poisoning. What's causing this poisoning is the environment. It is the unnatural external environment that the microbe has to adapt to. So I'm sort of speculating a little bit with this whole discussion on microbes a little bit. Like, I don't have empirical evidence to back it up, but you know, logically it's certainly sound. The other thing is if you eat spoiled cooked foods, right? This is technically a totally unnatural environment. You know, naturally there is no cooked food in our realm, right? So, you know, you can't go around and say that animals know what it's like to eat cooked foods, especially spoiled cooked foods. So spoiled cooked foods are a totally unnatural phenomenon. I'm not going to say that cooked foods are necessarily bad, but I will say that eating spoiled cooked food can cause food poisoning. Spoiled GMO foods, spoiled pesticide foods, animals grown with, you know, antibiotics and vaccines, you know, that meat, even if eaten raw and in, you know, its purest form, might cause illness, right, due to the toxicity in the environment. You know, so the body doesn't like foreign material in it. So the obvious response here is to release the food as soon as it comes in. But why don't we do that when it comes to something like, you know, eating McDonald's? Well, that's sort of interesting. As your body purifies, you cannot consume McDonald's without getting sick. You know, no one goes to Taco Bell and doesn't get detox symptoms the next day. It might be a delayed response because there's not an immediate communication from the food to the body because you're consuming sterile food. So the food needs to come in, be processed, and then the body realizes it needs to be released. See, the microbes are like the communicators on a very micro scale, obviously. So when the food spoils, unnatural food spoils, and you consume it, your body knows that it's toxic because of the microbes. The microbes can actually communicate with our bodily systems. You could think of it as interfacing with our immune cells. The immune system doesn't exist, but the immune cells do. So there's likely an interfacing there. When you consume the food, if there are microbes present in the food and they're foreign microbes that have never existed in the history of mankind or in the history of our realm, for that matter, because we've synthesized these chemicals in a lab that the microbe is getting adapted to, you know, the body can realize that this is foreign. We need to release it right away. So immediate detox symptoms occur. But like I was saying, you consume McDonald's, you consume Taco Bell, you know, the next day you're going to feel like shit. You're going to have detox symptoms for the most part. Now, the concept of tolerance comes into play here. You build up tolerance to these foods, you're not going to get as many symptoms. But this concept of tolerance is something that we will discuss in future videos, so make sure to stick around for that. I think it fits in really well to our discussion here. But briefly, what we're talking about is consuming McDonald's all the time, you're not going to get detox symptoms all the time. I remember when I was first year university, I had McDonald's like 4 times a week. It was absolutely disgusting. And all my other meals were meal hall meals, so they were shit as well. You know, I was just eating totally shit food, but my body got used to it. You know, now I did have the worst symptoms of my life in first year university because I led a really poor, you know, lifestyle and diet and everything that comes with that. So, you know, it's not as though I wasn't suffering or didn't have any sort of dis-ease. I just didn't get these immediate gastro signals to release the food, you know, and I still did. You know, again, like these are still symptoms that I experienced, but I wouldn't say that it was as immediate as a food poisoning experience, right? So the other thing is what happens if we consume rotten natural foods, something like high liver. I kind of mentioned it earlier. This is more of an internal problem, right? Not being adapted to be able to consuming these foods. Many people consume rotten organ meats, rotten meats in general, rotten blubber, whatever. So many tribes consume this stuff. Now, I do think it's more of a medicine than anything. Like I do think that you'd have to be a pretty pristine individual to not get detox symptoms from this, like severe detox symptoms, but it's always going to be detoxing. Like you're getting a good dose of microbes to help you clean up your environment. So I think that's kind of an important point to make. I think it's more as medicine and not necessarily as food, but at the same time, human beings were probably scavengers. If you saw food on the ground that was rotting, you were probably going to consume that if you were hungry. So we definitely had a scavenger role, right, beyond just berries and whatever. If there was a carcass, we would probably scrape that thing up if there's anything left on it. So, you know, we should be used to consuming these foods without, you know, immediately getting sick and getting, you know, food poisoning symptoms. But same goes with water. You know, there's like the tribes in Africa are consuming mud water, you know, puddles. It's as stagnant as can be, and they can consume this because their bodies are adapted to it. So you could see the interplay between external and internal here, right? These are conceptually helpful to categorize what we're discussing, but at the end of the day, there is no categories, right? We're just kind of conceptualizing this here, right? So in reality, it's always an interplay of the internal and the external systems going hand in hand. So I would say that, you know, the native tribes had such a high adapted body, right? They had their systems were totally adapted to, you know, nature and the microbes therein. They could consume stagnant water. Now, you don't want to consume stagnant water because you're not going to be used to that environment. Probably has a detoxing effect. I'm not going to lie. I've never really heard of that, but I would speculate that, you know, going and consuming some of that water would give you some good detox symptoms, that's for sure. Okay, last point I want to make here is, can detox kill you? Yes, it can. Detox can kill you. So can food poisoning kill you? There are cases where it can kill you. Now, is it the food poisoning or the microbe that's killing you? No, it's likely that you have an extremely toxic environment, or you consumed an extremely toxic food, or probably a combination of both. You know, but I would say that it tends towards, you know, if you're dying from food poisoning, from food poisoning symptoms, right, for lack of better terms, you had a terribly unnatural internal environment. It's like those people, they study this Vibrio microbe in oysters, and they say that it can kill people, right? But a huge confounding variable is these people have kidney and liver failures. Like, they have these totally unnatural, diseased environments internally. So, you know, if you are dying from a food poisoning or know someone that died from food poisoning, you definitely had an extremely toxic internal environment, and it's not the microbe that's causing it. The detox symptoms might have been the trigger, but these are the types of people who would also die from a flu, right? Because the flu symptoms would cause the same idea as the food poisoning, right? So at the end of the day, it was that unnatural, diseased, and toxic internal environment that is the true cause of death here. So let's wrap this up here. There's two ways we can conceptualize this: internal and external environments. If your body is rejecting the food, it is due to unnatural external environments for the most part. If your body needs detox, it's because you have an unnatural internal environment. You know, your body should get adapted to these microbes, or, you know, these microbes aren't going to trigger a detox event because there's no toxicity in your symptoms. There's sort of different ways to conceptualize this and discuss this. When you're looking at yourself, you know, why did I get food poisoning? Like, why did this happen to me? I eat pretty healthy. I eat raw foods, etc., etc. You know, it's case by case, so you do need to look at yourself and your situation. You need to be objective. The reality of the situation is that 25 years of processed food can't be healed necessarily altogether in 5 years. There's likely still some toxicity at play here. Maybe there's still not a full adaptation to our natural environments. The reality of the situation, I think the more wild game you get, if you're eating wild game raw, that's detoxing, man. That's as heavy as it can get. So I do think that plays a role, right? You're probably going to be better off starting with beef and fish rather than eating rabbit and lizards and deer and moose and all that stuff, or bear, stuff like that. You know, so I think that's kind of an important point. Those are definitely more detoxing. They're more wild. They're totally out of our realm. You know what I mean? We live in houses. We're not used to their environments, right? Could we get there? Yeah, even if you live in a house, probably, I'm sure we could get there. There's definitely some people that were there. If you want to experience the symptoms, that's it. You can go and do that. Eat the raw food. It is good to consume raw food to be able to detox, but I think this is where Adgenus really shines. You want to slowly detox. You want to be able to get the toxins out without necessarily feeling like shit all the time. But at the end of the day, sometimes feeling like shit is the best way to grow. Alright, well, if you enjoyed this video, give us a like, share, comment, all that good stuff. Make sure to subscribe. Go sign up on that waiting list for our private community. We'll be talking about all sorts of topics like this. Really going to be a community-driven thing there too. I really want to hear you guys' input on the stuff you want to hear about. There's a lot of things that I want to talk about that I don't feel comfortable with putting on YouTube. So we'll really be able to speak freely about certain topics that definitely cannot be on YouTube. So, I really want you guys over there and to build something special. All right, so make sure you go join the waiting list down below. You'll be able to kind of see what the community is going to have to offer. There's going to be such cool things going on. I really want to put a lot of time and effort into this community. I really want to pour my heart and soul into it. It's a great way to help kind of support what we're doing here as well. If you really love what we're doing, you'll be able to get something in return as well. And this community is going to keep growing and growing. We're going to have more and more to offer as we go, so make sure to go check it out. I really appreciate you guys. Make sure you go check that out. I really appreciate you guys for checking out this video today. All right, guys, thanks for listening. Take care.